All right, this brings us back to Micah 7 and verse 11. So let me bring that up. In the day that thy walls are to be built, in that day shall the decree be far removed. Now I want you to just pay a little bit of attention about the decree, because I want to tell you what that is. The decree is talking about God, the promise that if they disobeyed, God was going to pour His wrath out upon them. That's what the decree is. And the reason I'm taking a minute to talk about that, all right, the kids don't need to pay special attention to this statement here, but the reason I'm talking about that is because when people read about the decree, they do all kinds of crazy things to think about what God was saying or doing or what that was about. This is nothing more than God talking about the warning from Micah that the fifth course of punishment is about to come upon them. That's what the decree is about. So how in the world do we know that? First of all, from the context of Micah chapter 7. That's going to become pretty obvious. For instance, he talks about in verse 13, the land is going to be desolate. He's going to take everyone out of it. So he's talking about what's going to happen at the captivity. The second way we know is because the other prophets use that same terminology. For example, Zephaniah. He's a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah, and he's warning them that God is going to consume everything out of the land, man and beast. He's telling them the fifth course coming upon them. Take a look in Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 1. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, before the decree come forth, before the day passes the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come. You see what he's saying there? You guys, before this happens, see, O nation not desired, you know who that is? That's Israel. The other nations of the world don't want them there. There's a satanic policy of evil to get rid of the nation. By the way, the first two verses are talking to the whole nation. But when you get to verse 3, he's only going to be talking to the remnant in that nation. But in the first two verses, he's talking to the nation, and he says, look, you need to gather yourselves together before the decree bring forth. Does anybody know where did God decree about this fifth course of punishment that was going to come upon them? Huh? I'm not hearing you. Yeah, Leviticus 26. That's the decree. It was part of the covenant. He made with them all the way back there. If you do good, you get these blessings. If you don't, you get these curses, and here it is. That's the decree. So that's how we pick that up. So when you see verse 2 and 3, seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought His judgment, seek righteousness. All right, now, kids, pay attention to this, because this is important. Now we're getting into the part you need to get. He tells them, seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought His judgment, seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Okay, let me pause here and put the story together. Here's the prophet. Zephaniah is talking about it, and Micah is talking about it. And what they're saying, here's what you know so far. God in the future is going to do some marvelous things that are going to be just like the things that He did when they came out of Egypt. And we read that. Now, He's saying, you members of the remnant, there is a way for you to be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. In other words, when God starts pouring out all this judgment on Israel, there is a way for you to be hid in the midst of that, which means you won't be going through that. So if you're a member of the remnant, what is the natural question you'd be asking right now? Yeah, how and where? Where do I go? And so, but from Zephaniah, you know there is a way to miss that. There is a way to get around that. So the decree is God saying, hey, all the way back to Leviticus 26, if you guys don't get reformed by what's happened before, I'm going to bring this next one up on you. And by the way, Daniel didn't call it a decree, he called it an oath. You know what an oath is? It's a promise. And so God says this. I'm sorry. Took you back to Zephaniah 2, but I need to go to Daniel. There it is, 9:11. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore, the curse is poured upon us. Isn't that the terminology that Leviticus 26 used? Yes. And the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. So he says, look, God swore an oath that if you did this, this is what was going to happen. So the prophet is warning them, and he's saying, you know what, there may be a way for you to miss that. So while Micah chapter 1 is warning the people that the fifth course of punishment is about to come upon them, by the time, look, I'm looking at this timeline. Just follow with me here a second. Micah chapter 1 is warning about all the way back here. Let's see, right? Here's that Israel's captivity right here. Micah chapter 1 talks about events that are happening here. If you guys don't get yourselves turned around, you're going to go away into captivity. But you know what? We're not playing the role of someone back there. We're playing the role of someone out here. And when you get to Micah chapter 7, now he's talking about things that are happening at the end of the fifth course of punishment. So we're going to kind of change gears with that and start reading here in Micah chapter 7. So verse 11. In the day that thy walls are to be built, in that day shall the decree be far removed. In that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria, and from the fortified cities, and from the fortress even to the river, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. Notwithstanding, the land shall be desolate because of them that dwell therein, for the fruit of their doings. Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwells solitarily in the wood, in the midst of Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old. Now, the first thing that I want to point out here when we get to this, when he says, feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, does that ring a bell with anybody? Does that remind you of anything you've read anywhere in your Bible? Say that louder, Mark. Moses in the wilderness, there was a rod there. But think about this issue of feeding them. Just think about that terminology and the rod. Where else would you go? That's not bad. That was fine. Huh? Someone say something? Oh, say that again, Barbara. Yeah. Where is that found? Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the midst of mine enemies. Yeah, Psalm 23. Psalm 23. Now that, I'm just going to say this, you need to remember this psalm. Psalm 23. All right, now I'm going to give you information that our adventurers don't need to hold on to, but just for the sake of everybody here. The entire book of Psalms. Anybody remember how many, I don't call them chapters, I guess you could, but how many Psalms the book of Psalms divided up to? It's 150. And so here's the way that happens. That whole 150 Psalms is divided into 5 books. All right, now this is important. I'm telling you, this is important. Does anybody know what the 5 books of the Psalms are connected to? Thank you. Yeah. Here's Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my... When you prepare a table for someone, what are you doing? Yeah, you're putting food out for them to eat, aren't you? You're preparing a table. You're getting ready to feed somebody. Psalm 23, folks, I know what we use it for today. We read it at funerals. Doctrinally, now look, I don't want to argue with anybody that wants to do that. But when this psalm was written, it was not written to be a funeral psalm for people in the dispensation of grace. It was written to be a comfort to the members of the believing remnant who are suffering under the hand of the Antichrist. And it is telling them about a provision that is going to be made for them. So, that first book of the Psalms is from Psalm 1 to Psalm 41, and because it connects to the 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant, just what Linda said a while ago. Look at this. The entire book of Psalms is divided into 5 books which pertain to the 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant. The fact that I put that up on the PowerPoint ought to tell you that is important for you to know. That's just a fact. I'm telling you now that that needs to stick in your mind. And now here's the breakdown. Psalm 1 to 41 is the Redeemer. Now you don't have to know all of this, but I'm giving it to you if you want to mark it down. 42 to 72, those are the Deliverer Psalms, because these are the 5 mandates. 73 to 89 is the Avenger Psalms. 90 to 106 is the Psalms of the King. And 107 to 150 is the Blesser. That's out there in the kingdom. Those are the Psalms that are going to be done. Now I'm giving you that breakdown, and if you go over in your Bible and just mark those down on the page there, if you have that wide margin Bible, you can mark those down and then later kind of work your way through the Psalms to see how all of that is. My point, though, is Psalm 23 is sitting in the midst, almost in the exact middle of the Redeemer Psalms. And that's the way all of these Psalms are. Now look, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Psalm 23 is sitting at the very core, or the very center of the Redeemer Psalms. And that core is 3 Psalms. It's a trio. Think of the 3 Musketeers, or the 3 Little Pigs, or 3 Men in a Tub, or Mo, Larry, and Curly, or Abbott and Costello didn't have a sidekick. Okay, so you got to get 3. They're sitting there like 3 in the midst of the Redeemer Psalms, and that is Psalms 22, 23, and 24. Let me show you this. 22, in 22:1, here's how it starts out. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? What is that? Where does that come from? That's the words of Jesus on the cross. Psalm 22 is talking about the cross. In Psalm 24, it's going to talk about the kingdom and the King of glory. So, if you wanted to alliterate it, you could call that the crown. So you have the cross in 22 and the crown in 24, but 23 sits in the middle. So if it was following the natural progression of things, you know that whatever's happening in 23 is something happening in Israel's program between the cross and the kingdom. And you know what that is? It's right out here when they're in the Lord's day of wrath and they're being hunted down by the Antichrist and they're trying to survive. And Psalm 23, I'm just going to keep using the C for the alliteration. It's the comfort psalm. God is going to prepare a table for you in the presence of your enemies. His rod and staff are going to comfort you. And so what you have here, I'll talk too much about it and then we'll lose time, and I can't afford to do that. But there's a way, all of these books of the Psalms, these up here, there's a way that they're done where they start out and they build to a crescendo in the middle here in Psalm 22, 23, and 24. And then you know what happens? Then that begins to kind of taper off until you get to Psalm 42. And that thing is kind of tapered off and it kind of moves you into the deliverer psalms. And when you get to the middle of that section, it builds to a crescendo again. And then that kind of tapers down. And by the time you get to Psalm 72, it's kind of come back down. And then you move into 73 and you're moving into the Avenger song. And it does the same thing. It rises and gets more and builds until it comes to a mountaintop. The core of each one of those. That's the way those are laid out. Now, having said that, and shown those to you, when the Lord comes at His first coming, at the cross, you know what He is? He's the Good Shepherd who gives His life for the sheep. Out here in the kingdom, He's the chief shepherd. But when He's talking about the members of the remnant being His flock, remember Micah, the flock of thine inheritance? What does the Lord Himself call them over there in the Gospels? His what? His little flock. When it comes to that, if they're a flock, that makes Him the shepherd, right? He's the good shepherd when He comes the first time. He's the chief shepherd. This is what the Bible calls Him, by the way. This is John chapter 10. I want to say this is 1 Peter chapter, I don't know. But He's the chief shepherd. When you get to the book of Hebrews, and he's talking about comforting these members of this flock, these believers, this believing remnant out here, He's the great shepherd. And that's over in the book of Hebrews. Because the program has started up again and he's trying to tell them how they're going to get comfort. Do you see how these times run together? The cross, and then that time of tribulation where they need to be comforted, and then the time of the kingdom where the glory is going to be revealed. Okay, so back to Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. The issue of His rod comforting them and preparing a table for them is the issue that Micah was talking about, feeding them. Let me take you back. This is the important verse to remember. Micah 7:14, feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage. Do you see that? So when Micah is picking, now put all this together. You're a member of the believing remnant. And what do you now know? You know that when you see that abomination of desolation, you have to get out of Jerusalem. You know you don't have the mark of the beast. You can't buy or sell. Your money won't do you any good. You know that there is a way for you to be hid. The Lord is going to pour His anger out on the nation, but there's a way for you to escape that. And you know that now there are some promises that are saying you can be fed. And by the way, if you don't have any money, it is only a matter of time until you get hungry. You're going to need something to sustain you. For the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. That's a pretty long fast. So you're going to have to eat. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take you to Psalm 68. Last week we were all over Psalm 68. But it says, according to the... I'm sorry, that's Micah 7. Why did I do that? According to the days of thy coming out of the land of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things. Here, let me ask you a question. was one of the marvelous things God did when they came out of Egypt? Okay, Barbara goes, manna. Because there were no restaurants. Moses could not say to them, y'all want to stop at McDonald's before we get to Sinai? None of that. So they got to eat. So God miraculously feeds them with manna. According to the days of thy coming out of the land, will I show unto him marvelous things. Wait a minute. You're a member of the believing remnant. You're running for your life. Your money isn't going to do you any good. In fact, you just have to leave everything behind. And when you do, you got to say to yourself, how am I going to eat? Now you could go to Sandy's house and you could knock on his door and say, you got to give me something to eat. But how do you know Sandy's not going to call the Antichrist when you're in the other room? Okay, but we're role playing. Okay. Yeah, so Linda believes you're saved, Sandy. So see, there's a plus. Okay. So, I mean, let's suppose you're going to go somewhere and you're going to say, I need help. By the way, if someone gets caught helping the members of the remnant, what happens to them? Yeah, see, bad news for them too. So people are thinking, oh, I can't. In fact, there's a reward for turning you in. So if you go to someone's house and they go, oh yeah, come in. Let me go back here and get you something. What if they're contacting the people who are going to turn you over to the Antichrist? Now we're going to talk about that issue in a moment because the Bible in Micah 7 is going to spend 5 verses talking about that issue. This is very important because if you're going to survive during that time, God's going to give you a rule that you're going to have to go by. So this manna, that's what you're going to be given there. By the way, Revelation talks about this too. Look with me in Revelation 2:17. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh, talking about that believing remnant, will I give to eat of the hidden manna. That's exactly what he did when they came out of Egypt. Wasn't that part of the marvelous things that God did back there? It was. So I give to eat of the hidden. Why is it called hidden manna? Because when you look at the land of Israel, the manna doesn't fall everywhere. It only falls in certain locations. Listen to this. In Daniel's 70th week, in the middle of that week, there will be certain members of the remnant who will decide, they know they have to get out of Jerusalem, and they are going to flee into, some of them are going to come down and flee into the wilderness where they wandered for 40 years. Some of them are going to flee into the other nations. But listen, the other nations may not be so friendly and welcoming. They may just take you and turn you over to the Antichrist. And some are going to flee into the land of Israel. But the manna isn't going to fall just everywhere. It's only going to fall in certain places. Now look at Micah 7:14 again. Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwell solitarily in the wood. When he talks about that, look, there is an area, it's a wooded area in Israel. We're going to mark it on our map in just a minute. There's a wooded area in Israel that they'll be able to go. They'll be able to hide from the Antichrist. They'll be able to avoid the plagues of the tribulation. And they'll be fed with the hidden manna while they're there. That's part of that Psalm 23 comfort issue. So, to take you back over to Psalm 68 now, take a look at this. It says, let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let them also that hate him flee before him. This is the cry and the prayer of the believing remnant as they're being persecuted in Daniel's 70th week. They're saying, let God arise. Let him come and destroy all of his enemies. Look at this next verse. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melted before the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. You know what they're asking for? They're asking for the Lord to show back up and destroy his enemies. They want the presence of God. That's what they're crying out for. People look at that and they go, oh, that's just the poetic language of the King James. That's the cry of the believing remnant. Now look at verse 3. But let the righteous be glad, let them rejoice before God. Yea, let them exceedingly rejoice. Sing unto God, sing praises to his name. Extol him that rideth upon the heavens by his name, Jah, and rejoice before him. I'm sorry, I guess that was the end of that one. What is it they're rejoicing over? Did you notice it changed gears? Let the Lord come back and stomp his enemies. And then let the righteous rejoice. What are they rejoicing over? Yeah, the destruction of the Gentiles that were persecuting them. Can I just say this on the side? People go back into the Psalms and they read all the Psalms and they go, praise the Lord, extol him, blah, blah, blah. You know what a lot of those are about? Read the context. It's about God crushing the Gentiles. We just act like it's just a happy, feel-good praise and worship session. It's about God destroying people. And then the righteous will rejoice, and sing praises to the Lord about their deliverance, right? All right, just saying. And so now, pay attention to this. This is important. A father, this is verse 5, a father to the fatherless and a judge of the widows is God in his holy habitation. Now, according to this thing, I only have a minute and a half left in this session, but this is critical for everybody to get. This is important to know. Why does he say a father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows? I've heard people talk about that and they say, yeah, you know what, if you don't have a father, God said he'll be your father, and they want to kind of make it sound like that. When he's saying a father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows, he is talking about the members of the remnant that have been turned against by the members of their own families. That's what he's talking about here. Now, we have to read this. I'm not going to be able to do it before the time runs out. I am going to read it, though, and we're going to look at it. And this is important. There are several things that you guys will need to make a decision about based on this. This is very important. Micah chapter 7, verse 2. The good man is perished out of the earth, and there is none upright among men. Wait a minute. Are you getting the gist of this? I mean, don't just read through it with me. Just look at it. The good man is perished out of the earth, and there is none upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. They hunt every man his brother with a net. You know what that is? That's them turning in, capturing and turning in members of their own family because they are part of the believing remnant. He says, if you think there's anyone left out there that's a good person, that's going to be upright, are you listening? This is important. Don't miss this. If you think there's someone out there that's going to help you out, you need to think again. How many, the good man has perished off the earth, and there's a few upright men. Is that what it says? It says there's none upright among men. They lie in wait for blood. Now look at verse 3. That they may do evil with both hands earnestly. The prince asketh, and the judge asketh for a reward. And the great man, he uttereth his mischievous desire. So they wrap it up. The best of them is as a briar. Do you see what God is saying here? The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of the watchman and thy visitation cometh, now shall their perplexity. All right? You guys, listen to this. Look at verse 5. You got a decision to make. Trust ye not in a friend. Put ye not confidence in a guide. Keep the doors of thy mouth from her that lieth in thy bosom. Wait a minute, the doors of your mouth. What's it talking about there? Yeah, and who is her that lieth in thy bosom?
Your husband or wife.
It could be your husband, it could be your wife, someone near and dear to you. You know what he's saying here? Don't trust a friend. Don't put confidence in a guide. Listen, here's what he's saying. You want to get to where you're going to be hidden from these things, and you're going to be fed, and you're going to find comfort. When you read this, how many people do you think you should be talking to about that? Okay, Barbara's doing, okay, just what Crystal did. They both did the same thing. Goose egg. Don't talk to anybody about that. Why? Why? What if they go, but I just want to make sure you're okay. I'm not going to turn you in. I just want to make sure you're okay. What does the Scripture say? It says, don't talk to them. Don't tell them what you're doing. What's the guide about? You know what? If you can find someone that can take me to one of these places where I'll be safe, I need a guide. Are you supposed to do that? The only thing you're going to have is what Crystal and Mickey have today. You're going to have a Bible and a map. And if you don't know the verses to turn to, you don't know where to go. So if you go get a guide, you know what you're probably doing? You're talking to somebody that's going to turn you in for a reward. That's exactly what that is. All right, now I've gone over time on this one. So now we've gotten to the place where the kids are going to have to listen very carefully, because we're about to fill in things on the second map in your notes. And those are going to be the 4 places that you can go in the land of Israel in order to be safe from the Antichrist, to avoid the judgments of the tribulation, and to get the hidden manna. And I wonder, even as we're teaching this, how someone might find these notes and think, I got to go there. I mean, I can just imagine, here's Crystal and Mickey back there, you know, they're doing their maps. Can you imagine someone finding their maps and go, oh, I'm going to get to know where to go. And then they didn't fill them in. Oh! But you know what? You never know where this is going to go. I mean, you never know how this is going to be. These lessons go out all over the world.
It's going to be kind of hard for them people to communicate just to find out information if they can't talk to anybody.
It is going to be tough. Yes. It is going to be tough.
They can't organize. They can't do anything. If you don't know where to go, you're just stuck.
By the way, I'm glad you said that. Let me say this and we'll end this session. Let me see if I can get it back here to where it was. Yeah, look at that. Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwell how? Solitarily in the wood. That means what? They're alone. That's just the point you were making. They're living there going, I can't let anybody know what's going on. Because if I do, they'll turn me in for a reward for sure. If that's the people that you're related to, I'm going to show you a shocking verse when we come back. All right, Chris was looking at her mom like, you would turn me in. And Linda goes, but how much is the reward? All right, so I'm going to show you a shocking verse when we come back that's going to drive this point home. So we'll stop here, we'll take our break, and then we'll come